The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of a folded envelope placed at the edge of my plate. It was Thanksgiving morning just after 9 in my parents' house in Fairmont, New Jersey. The smell of turkey was already thick in the air, even though dinner was hours away. My mother liked control more than punctuality. Everything had to be prepared early, visible, announced. I was 32 years old, married for less than 6 months, and still sitting at the same dining table where I'd learned slowly that silence was safer than disagreement. My name was Emily Carter. My younger brother, Lucas, sat across from me, scrolling on his phone, one foot hooked around the leg of the chair like he was ready to leave at any moment. My sister-in-law, Hannah, leaned into him, whispering something that made him smile. My father, Robert, stood at the counter, pretending to review a grocery list he'd memorized years ago. My mother, Diane, hovered between the kitchen and the dining room, watching everyone at once. No one said anything about the envelope. That was deliberate. I reached for my water glass instead, buying time. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, heavier than a card. My mother's handwriting sat neatly in the corner, my name written carefully, like it had been practiced. "Open it," she said finally, her voice light, "before things get busy." Lucas didn't look up. My father shifted his weight, but kept his eyes down. Hannah stopped whispering. I slid my finger under the seal and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, formal. I scanned the first line and felt something cold settle in my chest. "Emily, as you know, we've been doing some estate planning. Nothing urgent, just practical." I read faster. "We've decided to move forward with a revised will. The family business will remain within the direct line of succession. Lucas will assume operational control when the time comes." I looked up. My mother was smiling, not warmly, expectantly. "This doesn't change anything," she said quickly. "You understand that, right?" I didn't answer. My eyes dropped back to the page. "Given your stable situation and independent household, we know you'll appreciate the logic behind this decision." The word logic burned more than it should have. I kept reading. "Your role will remain supportive, as it always has been." Supportive. That was it. No mention of ownership. No share. No vote. Just a carefully worded explanation for why I was being excluded from the family business my grandfather had started, the one I'd worked in every summer from age 16 to 24. The one I'd helped keep afloat when my father had surgery and Lucas was still in college. The one I'd never officially been paid for, because family doesn't bill family. I folded the paper once, then again, slowly. No one moved. "Well," my mother asked, "we wanted you to hear it from us first, before lawyers and paperwork make it official." I swallowed. "First," I repeated. "Yes," she said. "Transparency matters." Lucas finally looked up. "It's not personal, Em. You're married now. You've got Mark, a life. I'm the one staying local." I glanced at him. He didn't meet my eyes for long. My father cleared his throat. "It's just how these things go." I nodded once. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask the question already forming in my head because I knew the answer would come wrapped in the same familiar phrases. "It makes sense. Don't overthink it. You're strong, you'll be fine." I stood up. "I need some air," I said. My mother frowned slightly. "Don't be dramatic." There it was. I stepped outside into the cold November morning, the door closing softly behind me. The backyard was quiet, bare trees, stretching thin branches into a gray sky. I wrapped my arms around myself and breathed in slowly. This was not the first time my family had decided something about my life without asking. It was just the first time they'd written it down. I remembered my wedding 6 months earlier. The way my parents had insisted on seating arrangements that put Lucas and Hannah front and center while Mark and I compromised. The way my mother had brushed off my concerns with, "It's just one day." I remembered my promotion at work 2 years ago, the call I'd made to tell them, the pause on the other end before my father said, "That's nice," and then asked if I could help Lucas with a loan application. I remembered birthdays forgotten, holidays rearranged, my needs framed as inconveniences, my boundaries treated like moods. Inside the house, I could hear voices again, laughter, the sound of comfort returning now that the decision had been delivered. I stood there longer than necessary. When I went back inside, my mother handed me a cutting board. "Can you chop the celery?" "Of course." Supportive. Dinner passed in a blur. No one mentioned the letter again. Hannah talked about a potential expansion for the business. Lucas complained about staffing issues. My father nodded proud. I listened. That night, Mark and I drove home in silence. The highway lights flickered past like distant stars. "You don't have to protect them," he said finally. "I'm not," I replied. But even as I said it, I felt the weight of something shifting inside me. This wasn't about inheritance. It was about position. I had always been useful, reliable, the one who filled gaps quietly. And now that usefulness had been acknowledged, categorized, and contained, that envelope wasn't just a document. It was a boundary drawn without my consent. And as I stared out the window, watching Fairmont disappear behind us, I understood something with unsettling clarity. This was only the beginning. Because once a family decides you don't need a seat at the table, the next step is expecting you to keep serving anyway. and I was done pretending not to notice. The week after Thanksgiving, nothing happened. That was what made it unsettling. No follow-up call. No clarification. No softening of what had already been said. My parents didn't check in to see how I was taking the news. Lucas didn't text. Hannah didn't pretend to smooth things over. Silence, I was learning, was their way of letting a decision harden. At work, life continued with its usual rhythm. Meetings, deadlines, emails that needed answers. I worked as a senior operations manager for a regional logistics company in Newark, a role I had built carefully over 8 years. It was the one place in my life where effort led to recognition, where decisions were explained instead of handed down. The contrast felt sharper now. On Wednesday afternoon, while I was reviewing a quarterly report, my phone buzzed. Mom. I stared at the screen longer than necessary before answering. Hi, I said. Hi, sweetheart, she replied, her tone overly warm. I just wanted to check in. I waited. We're meeting with the accountant on Friday, she continued. About the business. There may be some documents we need you to sign. There it was. What kind of documents, I asked. Oh, nothing complicated, she said quickly. Just confirming things. You've always been good with paperwork. I leaned back in my chair, eyes fixed on the glass wall of my office. Confirming what I asked. A pause. Your acknowledgement of the new structure, she said. It's standard. Just a formality. A formality? I felt something tighten behind my ribs. Not anger, not yet, but recognition. Why would I need to sign anything I asked evenly if I'm not involved anymore? Another pause longer this time. Well, she said because you were involved before, and this keeps everything clean. You understand, right? That phrase again. I closed my eyes briefly. I'll need to see the documents first, I said, her voice cooled by a degree. Of course, we'll send them over. She hung up quickly after that, as if the conversation had taken longer than she'd planned. I didn't tell Mark about the call that night. Not because I was hiding it, but because I wanted to sit with it myself first. I needed to understand what I was feeling before I let anyone else interpret it for me. 2 days later, the email arrived. From my father. Attached were 3 PDF files. Dense, legal language. My name appeared more times than I was comfortable with. I didn't open them right away. Instead, I forwarded them to my friend Rachel, an attorney I'd gone to college with who now specialized in corporate law. Can you take a look at these, I wrote. Just tell me what they actually mean. She replied within an hour. Do not sign anything yet, let's talk. We met for coffee that evening at a small cafe near her office. Rachel scanned the documents with a frown that deepened the longer she read. They're restructuring ownership, she said, but that's not the issue. What is, I asked. She tapped the page. They're asking you to waive any future claim. Not just to ownership, but to profits, intellectual property, even deferred compensation for past involvement. I stared at her. They're erasing you, she said plainly, retroactively. I felt my hands curl slowly around my coffee cup. So they want me to confirm I was never entitled to anything I said? Yes, Rachel replied, and by signing this, you'd be agreeing that your past work was voluntary, unpaid, non-binding. The word unpaid echoed in my head. I thought about the summers I'd spent balancing books, the weekends I'd covered shifts, the holidays I'd missed because something at the warehouse needed attention. Family helps family. That was always the line. They're asking you to disappear, Rachel added. I nodded once. Don't sign, she said, and don't confront them yet. I looked up. Why not? Because they think you will, she said. And that expectation is leverage. That night I slept poorly. Not because I was unsure, but because my mind kept replaying moments I'd dismissed over the years. Small things, comments, assumptions, like the time my father introduced Lucas as the future of the business while I stood beside him holding a clipboard. Like the time my mother told me I was too emotional to be involved in decisions, then asked me to clean up the fallout. Like the way Hannah spoke about expansions and plans as if I were a consultant, not family. By Monday morning, I knew one thing with certainty. This wasn't an isolated decision. It was a pattern reaching its logical conclusion. At lunch, I stepped outside my office building and called Lucas. He answered on the third ring. What's up? He asked. I got the documents, I said. Good, he replied. Mom was worried you'd overthink it. I paused. Did you read them? I asked. Not really, he said. That stuff's boring. Dad handled it. Do you know they erase any claim I have to the business? I asked calmly. Another pause. I mean, he said slowly, you were never officially on payroll. I closed my eyes. So you think that's fair? I said. I think he replied that you don't need it. You've always been fine on your own. There it was. The assumption that independence cancels contribution. I'm not signing, I said. What he asked surprised. I said I'm not signing. His tone shifted. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'm not, I replied. I'm just not making it easier for you. He exhaled sharply. Mom's not going to like this. I almost laughed. I know, I said. That's not my problem. When the call ended, I sat on the curb for a long moment, the city noise washing over me. I felt something new then. Not fear. Resolve. They had assumed I wouldn't look closely, that I'd prioritize peace over clarity, that I'd keep smoothing things over even as they cut me out cleanly. They were wrong. And as I stood up and walked back into my office, I understood something important. I hadn't lost my place yet, but they were trying to take it. And if I didn't act deliberately now, they'd succeed quietly. Chapter 2 ended, not with confrontation, but with awareness. The kind that changes how you listen, how you wait, and how you prepare. I didn't tell my parents I wasn't signing. I let the silence do that work for me. Days passed, then a week. No follow-up email, no reminder, no gentle nudge disguised as concern. That absence wasn't accidental, it was strategic. In my family, silence was the waiting room where pressure gathered strength. At work, December arrived with its usual weight. End-of-year reviews, budget forecasts, a promotion conversation that had been hinted at but not yet formalized. My director, Elaine Porter, asked me to step into her office one afternoon and close the door behind us. "You've been carrying more than your share," she said, tapping a folder. "I want you to know it hasn't gone unnoticed." I nodded. Compliments always made me uneasy. They came too late in my family, and I'd learned to distrust them. "We're restructuring," Elaine continued. "There's an opening at the regional level. I'd like you to consider it." I thanked her and said I'd think about it. That night, my mother called again. This time, she didn't ask how I was. "Your father's upset," she said. "He feels disrespected." I leaned against the kitchen counter, the hum of the refrigerator filling the space between her words. "I haven't said anything," I replied. "That's the problem," she said. "You're freezing us out." I almost smiled. "I'm reviewing documents," I said. "That takes time." She sighed, exaggerated. "Emily, this is becoming unnecessary." "What is?" I asked. "This tension," she said. "This distance." I waited. "You've always been so independent," she continued. "We thought you'd appreciate the logic. Lucas needs the business more than you do." There it was again, need as currency. "I'm not asking for control," I said carefully. "I'm asking for acknowledgement." She paused. "Acknowledgement of what?" "Of my work," I said. "Of my contribution." Her tone cooled. "You helped because you wanted to. We never forced you." I closed my eyes. That sentence had been waiting years to be spoken out loud. "No," I said. "You just made it the only way to belong." She didn't answer. When the call ended, I stood still for a long time, letting the truth settle. Love in my family had always come with conditions: compliance, availability, gratitude without expectation. I opened my laptop and pulled up the documents again, this time reading not just what they said, but what they assumed. They assumed I would comply quietly. They assumed I would value peace over equity. They assumed I would keep absorbing discomfort so no one else had to. That night, I emailed Rachel again. "What are my options if I don't sign?" I wrote. Her reply was short. "You stop being convenient, and you protect yourself." The next move came from my father. He showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Saturday morning, standing in the hallway with his coat still on, like he planned to leave quickly if he didn't like how the conversation went. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I didn't offer him coffee. That alone felt like a rebellion. "You didn't even ask," why, I said. "Why, what?" he asked. "Why I'm hesitating," I said. He waved a hand dismissively. "Because you overthink." I looked at him. Really looked. The lines around his mouth. The way his eyes avoided mine when the conversation turned uncomfortable. "Did you read the documents?" I asked. "Yes," he said too quickly. "Then you know they erase my past involvement," I said. "That's legal language," he replied. "It doesn't mean anything. It means exactly what it says," I said. He shifted. "You're married now. Your priorities are different." "That didn't stop you from asking me to work for free," I said. His jaw tightened. "This business is your brother's future," he said. "You've always been more flexible." "Flexible." I nodded slowly. "Then you won't mind stepping back," he added. I met his gaze. "I don't mind stepping back. I mind being written out." Silence fell between us, heavy and unfamiliar. "You're being difficult," he said finally. "I'm being precise," I replied. He left shortly after that, his disappointment hanging in the air like something unfinished. That afternoon, Mark came home and found me sitting on the floor with the documents spread out around me, pages marked with notes and tabs. "You look like you're building a case," he said gently. "I am," I replied, "against the version of myself they expect." He sat beside me. "What do you want to do?" I thought about it. "I want to stop reacting," I said, "and start deciding." That night, I made my first real move. I hired my own attorney. Her name was Susan Hale, mid-50s, calm, unimpressed by theatrics. She listened as I laid everything out, from the Thanksgiving envelope to the unsigned documents, from years of unpaid labor to the assumptions baked into every conversation. When I finished, she leaned back and folded her hands. "They're not just excluding you," she said. "They're insulating themselves." "From what?" I asked. "From accountability," she replied. "And from you." She explained my options, not emotionally, legally. I could refuse to sign. I could document my past contributions. I could protect my interests without asking permission. "This will change the dynamic," she warned. "It already has," I said. When I left her office, the air felt sharper, colder, clearer. I didn't feel angry. I felt awake. Because Chapter 3 wasn't about losing something. It was about realizing that the ground beneath me had been shifting for years and I'd finally noticed the movement. And once you notice, you don't pretend it isn't happening. You choose where to stand next. Once I hired Susan, everything slowed down. Not because the situation became less urgent, but because I stopped rushing to fill the silence my family used as pressure. Susan called it reclaiming tempo. She said, whoever controls the pace controls the outcome. For the first time, that was me. The first thing she asked for was documentation, emails, old schedules, messages, anything that showed my involvement in the business over the years. I hadn't kept records on purpose. I never thought I'd need to prove loyalty, but as I searched through old laptops and archived inboxes, a pattern emerged that was impossible to ignore. My name appeared everywhere when something needed fixing: payroll errors, supplier disputes, inventory shortfalls, holiday rushes when Lucas was too busy or out of town. I printed everything. Susan reviewed the stack quietly. You were operational, she said finally. Not symbolic, not supportive, operational. That word mattered. It meant contribution. It meant leverage. While I was gathering documents, my family escalated. It started with my mother leaving long voicemails I didn't return. Her voice shifted between disappointment and wounded confusion. We don't understand why you're doing this, she said in one. We raised you better than this. Then came my father's emails. Shorter, sharper. This is unnecessary. You're hurting the family. Stop involving outsiders. Outsiders. That was how they referred to anyone who disrupted the internal hierarchy. Lawyers, accountants, even Mark when his opinions didn't align with theirs. Lucas didn't contact me directly. Instead, Hannah sent a message. We're all under a lot of stress. Can't you just sign and move on? I didn't reply. Susan advised me not to. She said every response reset the clock and gave them something to work with. Let them talk into the void, she said. People reveal more when they don't get immediate resistance. She was right. A week later, my father sent an email that changed everything. Attached was a revised document, different language, softer tone. They were offering me a consulting agreement. 6 months, modest compensation, no decision-making authority. In exchange, I would sign the waiver. It was framed as a compromise. Susan read it and shook her head. This isn't a compromise. It's a payoff. For silence, I said. For legitimacy, she corrected. They want to say you agreed. That night, Mark and I sat at the kitchen table, the document open between us. What happens if you refuse? He asked. I stared at the screen. They'll say I'm unreasonable. He nodded. And if you accept, they'll say I was never wronged. I closed the laptop. I'm not doing either, I said. What are you going to do? He asked. I thought about it for a long moment. I'm going to stop participating, I said, entirely. Susan helped me draft a formal response, short, neutral, final. I declined to sign any waiver or agreement. I requested all further communication be directed through counsel. I stated that I was withdrawing from any unpaid or informal involvement with the business, effective immediately. No emotion, no explanation. When the email went out, something in me steadied. The fallout was immediate. My mother showed up at my apartment the next morning. She didn't knock. She rang the bell twice sharply. I opened the door and saw her standing there, coat buttoned, wrong eyes bright with something close to panic. How could you do this to us? She demanded. I stepped aside and let her in. She stood in the middle of the living room, taking it all in like she was searching for evidence of corruption. You've changed, she said. You're cold. I'm clear, I replied. She laughed bitterly. You think this lawyer is going to protect you from your own family? She already has, I said. Her face tightened. You don't need protection. I met her eyes. I needed respect. She shook her head slowly. This isn't how families work. I felt something shift then, a clean break. This is how ours worked, I said. For you? She stared at me, really stared like she was seeing a stranger. You were always the easy one, she said quietly. You didn't need much. The words landed softly and cut deeply. I needed the same things everyone does, I replied. I just learned not to ask you for them. She left without another word. That afternoon, Susan called. They've backed off, she said. For now. For now, I repeated. Yes, she said, because they're recalculating. That was when I understood the next phase wasn't about documents or money. It was about narrative. They would tell their version. I would live mine. And as I sat alone in the quiet apartment, something became clear with unsettling certainty. They had built a system that worked as long as I stayed predictable. The moment I stopped being useful without consent, the system began to fail. Chapter 4 wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the moment I stepped out of alignment with the role they wrote for me. And once you do that, there's no going back to pretending it fits. The first thing I lost was access. Not to money, not to property, to information. It happened quietly. The way most meaningful shifts do. I stopped receiving the casual updates that used to come without effort. No more forwarded emails about vendor delays. No texts asking for my opinion on staffing schedules. No offhand mentions of upcoming meetings or inventory changes. At first it felt like relief. Then it felt intentional. I heard about the holiday rush through a former coworker who still worked at the warehouse. She mentioned they were short-staffed and scrambling. They didn't ask you to help, she said, genuinely surprised. No, I replied. She paused. That's new. Yes, it was. At home, Mark noticed the change before I did. They're icing you out, he said one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. I know, I replied. And he asked, and I'm letting them, I said. That was the part that felt unfamiliar. Letting something fall apart instead of stepping in to stabilize it. The call came 2 days later. Lucas. He sounded rushed. Can you talk, he asked. I can listen, I said. We've got a situation, he continued. Supplier issue. Dad's freaking out. I waited. We could really use your insight, he added. Just this once. I closed my eyes. I'm not involved anymore, I said calmly. You don't have to be involved, he replied. Just helpful. Helpful. The word hung there between us, heavy with history. I can recommend a consultant, I said. Professionally. That's not the same, he snapped. No, I agreed. It isn't. He exhaled sharply. This isn't the time to make a point. I'm not making a point, I said. I'm respecting a boundary you asked for. Silence. You're really doing this, he said finally. Yes, I replied. When the call ended, my hands were steady. I expected guilt, fear, a pull to fix it. None came. Instead, there was a strange clarity. I wasn't being excluded anymore. I was being tested. Over the next week, the pressure shifted shape. My mother sent an email filled with concern. We're worried about you. This kind of isolation isn't healthy. My father sent a text. You're burning bridges you'll need later. Hannah sent nothing. She never did when things got uncomfortable. At work, Elaine followed up on the promotion. You've been distracted, she said gently. Is everything okay? I considered lying. Then I didn't. I'm disentangling from my family business, I said. It's taking focus. She nodded. That makes sense. It felt strange to be believed without debate. I accepted the promotion 2 days later. It came with a raise, broader authority, and a seat at a table I hadn't had to fight my way into. That night, my parents found out. Lucas must have told them. My mother called. You didn't mention you were moving up, she said. You didn't ask, I replied. You used to tell us everything, she said. I almost laughed. You used to listen, I said. Her silence was sharp. This is exactly what we were worried about, she said. You're drifting. No, I said. I'm anchoring. She hung up. By the end of the month, the business missed a major delivery window. Nothing catastrophic, but costly. Word spread quickly in their small professional circle. People noticed. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Susan called one afternoon with an update. They're nervous, she said, and they're starting to understand that your absence isn't symbolic. What does that mean? I asked. It means, she replied, they assumed you were optional. They're learning you were structural. That night, Mark and I sat on the couch quiet. I used to think being indispensable was security, I said. And now, he asked. Now I know it's leverage, I replied, and I've stopped giving it away. Chapter 5 wasn't about retaliation. It was about restraint, about allowing the consequences of their choices to exist without interference. I didn't step back in. I didn't soften the edges. I let the system feel my absence. And for the first time, they did. December ended with a phone call I didn't expect. It wasn't from my parents. It wasn't from Lucas. It was from the bank. The woman on the line spoke carefully, the way people do when they don't yet know how defensive the person on the other end might become. Ms. Carter, she said, we're calling regarding an account listed under your name in connection with Carter Distribution, LLC. My stomach tightened, but my voice stayed level. I'm no longer affiliated with the company. Yes, she replied. That's part of why we're calling. She explained that a line of credit had been adjusted. Increased. My name appeared as a secondary guarantor on the original paperwork. The bank needed confirmation of my continued consent. I felt something cold slide into place. I did not authorize any changes, I said. There was a pause. That's what we need to clarify. After I hung up, I sat very still. This was different. This wasn't emotional pressure or narrative manipulation. This was risk. I called Susan immediately. She listened without interrupting, then asked a single question. Did you ever formally remove your name from prior agreements? No, I said. I was never told I needed to. That's not an accident, she replied. Within an hour, she had requested copies of every document tied to the credit line. 2 hours later, she called me back. They extended it using an old authorization, she said, one that assumed ongoing involvement. Is that legal? I asked. It's questionable, she said, and it's dangerous for you. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from panic. From clarity. My family hadn't just excluded me. They'd kept me close enough to absorb liability. Supportive. Flexible. Reliable. Words that sounded generous until you realized what they protected. The next morning, Susan drafted a formal notice to the bank, disputing any authorization and requesting an immediate freeze pending review. Then she did something else. She filed a notice of disassociation. Clean, legal, irreversible. When I told Mark he didn't try to reassure me, he asked what happens next. They'll notice, I said. They noticed within hours. Lucas called first. What the hell did you do? He demanded. I protected myself, I said. You blindsided us, he snapped. The bank froze the account. That's not my doing, I replied. That's what happens when assumptions meet paperwork. You could have warned us, he said. I almost laughed. You didn't warn me, I said. You just used my name. Silence. Then softer, Dad's furious. I'm sure, I said. My mother called next. Her voice shook, but not with concern. With fear. This is serious, she said. You've put us in a terrible position. No, I replied. You did. I just stopped standing in it. She tried another approach. We never meant to hurt you. I said nothing. We just assumed. That's the problem, I said calmly. You assumed I would always absorb the consequences. She inhaled sharply. You're being cruel. I closed my eyes. No, I said. I'm being accurate. The calls didn't stop. My father left a voicemail accusing me of sabotage. Hannah sent a message asking if there was any way to undo the freeze. Lucas sent another text. Can you at least talk to the bank, smooth things over? I forwarded everything to Susan. She replied with one sentence. Do not engage. Let the process work. At work, the contrast was almost surreal. I stepped into my new role fully. Led meetings, signed off on budgets, made decisions that stuck. No one questioned my presence. No one told me to be grateful for being included. Authority, I realized, feels quiet when it's legitimate. By mid-December, the bank concluded its review. The extension was rolled back. My name was formally removed from all guarantees. Susan called me with the update. You're clean, she said. They're not. What does that mean, I asked. It means, she replied, they've lost leverage they didn't realize depended on you. That night, my father showed up again. This time, he looked older. Tired. He didn't sit. You've gone too far, he said. I didn't offer him water. You put the business at risk, he continued. I removed myself from it, I replied. There's a difference. You knew we needed that credit, he said. And you knew I didn't consent, I answered. He stared at me, something shifting behind his eyes. You used to care about this family, he said quietly. I met his gaze. I still do. That's why I won't lie for you. His mouth tightened. You've chosen your side, he said. I nodded. I chose myself. He left without another word. That night, I understood the escalation had crossed a line. This was no longer about inclusion or acknowledgement. It was about control. And control, once threatened, doesn't negotiate. It reacts. Chapter 6 ended not with resolution, but with exposure. The kind that strips away pretense. The kind that reveals exactly how much you were carrying when everything starts to wobble the moment you let go. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what would fall next. I was ready to watch it. The retaliation didn't come all at once. It arrived in pieces spaced just far enough apart to feel coincidental if you didn't know the pattern. First, my mother stopped calling. That alone would have been noticeable, but what followed made it unmistakable. I was removed from the family group chat. Not dramatically, not with an announcement. I just stopped receiving messages. Photos from dinners I wasn't invited to. Inside jokes that no longer pretended to include me. Silence weaponized. Then came the stories. A former neighbor ran into Mark at the grocery store and asked gently if everything was okay with my parents. She said she'd heard things were tense, that I'd made some choices that were hard on the family. That phrase again, made some choices, as if this were a phase, a mood, a personal failing rather than a response to years of quiet extraction. I didn't correct her. I thanked her for asking and moved on. At work, Elaine pulled me aside after a meeting. I don't want to overstep, she said, but someone called asking about you. My chest tightened. Who? She hesitated. Your mother. I felt a sharp, clean line draw itself inside me. What did she say? I asked. She asked if you were under unusual stress. Elaine replied carefully. She implied you might be acting impulsively. I nodded slowly. And what did you say? I asked. Elaine met my eyes. I said you were one of the most composed people I know. That was when I understood the next move. They weren't just reacting. They were reframing. Susan confirmed it the next day. They're building a narrative, she said. Unstable, emotional, difficult. For what purpose? I asked. To protect themselves, she replied. And to discredit you if this escalates further. How far can it go? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. They could claim you're acting out of resentment, she said. They could argue you were never a real contributor. They could suggest you're misremembering events. Gaslighting formalized. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after Mark had gone to bed, staring at nothing. This was the moment I'd always avoided, the one where silence no longer protected me. I thought about the Thanksgiving envelope, the bank call, the quiet assumption that I would absorb risk without consent. They hadn't just crossed lines. They'd relied on my reluctance to draw them. I called Susan the next morning. I want everything formalized, I said. Every boundary, every exit. She didn't ask why. She prepared a comprehensive disengagement packet. Notices, confirmations, requests for records. A demand letter outlining my prior unpaid contributions, not for compensation, but for acknowledgement. It establishes history, she explained. If they claim you were irrelevant, this contradicts that. We sent it certified. The response was immediate. My father's lawyer contacted Susan within 48 hours. Not conciliatory. Defensive. They denied everything. Denied my role. Denied my contributions. Denied any misuse of my name. They claimed I was confused. Susan forwarded me the response. They're lying, I said. Yes, she replied. but now it's on paper. That mattered, because lies written down don't float. They sink. Christmas arrived in the middle of this. No invitation came. I didn't expect one. Mark and I spent the day quietly, just the two of us. We cooked, we walked, we didn't rush. In the afternoon, my phone buzzed. Lucas. I almost didn't answer. Almost. What do you want? I asked. His voice was strained. This has gone too far. Define too far, I said. Dad's talking about selling, he said. The business. He says it's not worth the stress. I let that sit. And I asked, and he says it's because of you, Lucas replied. I closed my eyes. Of course he does, I said. You could fix this, Lucas said. Just talk to them. Say you overreacted. I laughed then. A short, humorless sound. You're asking me to lie, I said. I'm asking you to be practical, he replied. This is practical, I said. This is the first practical thing I've ever done for myself. He exhaled hard. You always do this. Do what I asked. Act like you're above it, he snapped. No, I said. I act like I'm done carrying it. Silence stretched between us. I didn't know, he said, finally. About the bank stuff. I believed him. That doesn't change what happened, I said. He hung up without another word. That night, my mother sent a single text. We never thought you'd turn against us like this. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed. I didn't turn against you. I stepped away from being used. I didn't wait for a reply. By the end of the week, Susan called with an update that changed everything. They made a mistake, she said. What kind? I asked. The kind that shows intent, she replied. They submitted a financial statement to the bank that listed you as an active operational partner after you'd formally disengaged. I felt my pulse slow. That's fraud, I said. Yes, she replied. And now we have leverage. I leaned back in my chair, the room suddenly very still. What happens next? I asked. Susan's voice was calm. Now she said you decide how far this goes. Chapter 7 wasn't about anger. It was about clarity. They had tried silence. They had tried pressure. They had tried rewriting reality. And when none of it worked, they crossed into something measurable, documented, provable. For years, I had been the invisible structure holding things up. Now I was the variable they couldn't control. And the power had shifted, not because I demanded it, but because I finally stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. The next move would be mine. I didn't rush my decision. That surprised Suze's. It surprised Mark, too. When you spend years reacting to other people's urgency, the absence of it feels unnatural. But urgency had never been my ally. It was the tool my family used to rush me into agreement before I had time to understand what I was giving up. This time I let the facts sit. Susan laid them out cleanly. Dates, documents, contradictions. The financial statement my parents' company had submitted listed me as an active operational partner weeks after my formal disengagement. It wasn't ambiguous. It wasn't sloppy. It was convenient. They needed your credibility, Susan said. Your history, your clean record. They needed my name, I replied. Yes. We talked through options. Cease and desist, formal demand for correction, reporting the discrepancy to the bank, escalation to regulators, civil action if I chose it. None of it required confrontation. None of it required a raised voice. It required decisions. What do you want? Susan asked. I didn't answer right away. I thought about my grandmother's stories, how she used to say that people confuse kindness with tolerance. How tolerance, when unexamined, becomes permission. I want the record corrected, I said. And I want distance. Susan nodded. That's reasonable. So we started there. She drafted a notice demanding immediate correction of all financial statements, listing me as an operational partner, confirmation in writing that my name would not be used in any capacity, and acknowledgement that prior representations were inaccurate. We gave them 72 hours, not as a threat, as a boundary. The response came fast. Too fast. My parents' attorney called Susan the next morning. His tone was clipped, careful. He claimed it was an administrative oversight. Susan asked why the oversight only appeared in documents tied to credit exposure. He didn't answer that. He promised correction. Susan asked for written confirmation. He hesitated. That hesitation told us everything. By the end of the day, my father called me directly. I hadn't blocked him yet. I wanted to hear this one. You're trying to destroy us, he said. His voice was controlled, but brittle around the edges. I'm asking you to stop using my name, I replied. You know that's not what this is about, he snapped. This is about accountability, I said. Something you've avoided for years by letting me absorb it. You're being dramatic, he said. This could ruin us. I leaned back against the counter, the kitchen quiet around me. You didn't worry about ruining me, I said calmly. He inhaled sharply. We gave you everything. I almost corrected him. Almost. But then I realized something. He believed that. In his mind, opportunity replaced compensation. Belonging replaced consent. Expectation replaced gratitude. That's your version, I said. It's not mine. He went quiet. You're forcing my hand, he said finally. No, I replied. You forced it years ago. I'm just not covering for you anymore. He hung up. That evening, Susan emailed me. They corrected the filings, she wrote, and the bank acknowledged the error. Relief came, but it wasn't the rush I expected. It was muted, controlled, because relief wasn't the point. Clarity was. The next shift came from inside the family. Not my parents. Hannah. She called late after 9 when people usually hope you'll be too tired to think clearly. I didn't know, she said quickly. About the paperwork, about the bank. I believe you, I replied. She paused, thrown off by the lack of accusation. Things are bad, she continued. Your dad's talking about selling. Lucas is panicking. Everyone's blaming everyone else. I listened. We need help, she said. Even just advice. I pictured her standing in their kitchen phone, pressed to her ear, eyes flicking toward the room where decisions had always been made without me. I'm not available for that, I said. Her voice tightened. You're really done. Yes, I replied. She swallowed. You were always the one who fixed things. I felt the truth settle. That's why I stopped, I said. She didn't argue. That was new. The next morning, Susan called with an update I hadn't anticipated. They're exploring a sale, she said, quietly. I closed my eyes. Why, I asked. They've lost leverage, she replied. Credit tightened. Trust shaken, and without you smoothing things over, the cracks are visible. I thought about the years I'd spent preventing exactly this outcome. Catching mistakes before they mattered. Absorbing blame before it spread. What does that mean for me, I asked. Susan's tone was careful. It means they may try one last thing. I felt it too. A shift in the air, the kind that comes before a storm. It arrived 2 days later in the form of an email from my mother. Subject line, let's talk. No apology, no acknowledgement, just an invitation framed like generosity. I didn't open it right away. I took a walk instead. Cold air, clear head. When I came back, Mark was waiting. You don't have to read it, he said. I know, I replied, but I want to. The email was longer than I expected, softer in tone. She spoke about family, about regret, about how things had gotten out of hand. She didn't mention the documents. She didn't mention the bank. She didn't mention the lies. She asked to meet. Just the two of us, no lawyers. I closed the laptop. That was the moment I understood what Chapter 8 was really about. They weren't asking for reconciliation. They were asking for access. And access had always been their real currency. I forwarded the email to Susan. Her reply came back quickly. If you meet on your terms, or don't meet at all. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I typed my response to my mother. I'm not meeting privately. If you need to communicate, do it through counsel. I sent it. No explanation. No softening. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sealed. Chapter 8 wasn't about revenge. It was about containment, about refusing to re-enter spaces designed to extract from me. They had tried to pull me back in with urgency, fear, and guilt. None of it worked, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to be understood. I was making myself unavailable, and that changed everything. The sale became public the way things always do when they're meant to look voluntary. An announcement framed as a strategic decision, a message about market conditions, a carefully worded explanation that made it sound like timing, not pressure, had driven the choice. I read about it in a local business newsletter forwarded by a colleague who didn't know the backstory. Thought you might find this interesting, she wrote. I did. The buyer was a mid-sized logistics firm out of Pennsylvania. Quiet, efficient, known for absorbing smaller companies and restructuring quickly. I forwarded the article to Susan. Her response was immediate. They're moving faster than expected. What does that mean? I asked. It means they're trying to close before anything else surfaces, she replied, including the paper trail we've already documented. I sat back in my chair and let that sink in. For years, my family had treated the business like a birthright, something permanent, untouchable, a symbol of continuity they never questioned because I made sure the cracks didn't show. Now it was being sold under them, and they were rushing. The call from my father came that evening. I didn't answer. The second call followed 10 minutes later. Then a text. We need to talk. This affects you too. That line almost worked. Almost. I forwarded it to Susan. She replied with a question. Do you want to be involved? I stared at the screen. I thought about the Thanksgiving envelope, the unsigned waiver, the bank documents with my name attached without consent, the way urgency had always been used to pull me back into a role I never agreed to. No, I typed. I want to stay out. Her reply came a moment later. Then stay out completely. No partial access, no side conversations. The next day, Lucas called. His voice was tight, controlled, like he was holding something back. They're selling, he said. You saw that, right? Yes, I replied. You could have warned us, he said. I didn't respond. They're saying the valuation's lower because of instability, he continued. Because of all this legal noise. I let him talk. You're costing us, he said finally. Yes, this is significantly. I exhaled slowly. No, I said. I stopped paying. Silence. You always do this, he said. You act like you're above it. I act like I'm done being responsible for it, I replied. This business was supposed to be mine, he snapped. It still is, I said. You're just learning what it costs without me covering the gaps. That was when his voice cracked. I don't know how to do this without you, he said. The honesty surprised me, but it didn't move me the way it once would have. That's something you should have learned years ago, I said quietly. He hung up without saying goodbye. Over the next week, the tone shifted again. My parents' attorney contacted Susan with a request. They wanted a release, not from me, from the buyer. They needed written confirmation that I had no claim, no involvement, no authority to challenge the sale. Susan laughed when she told me. They're afraid of you, she said. I don't want to be part of this, I replied. You already aren't, she said. That's why they're nervous. We drafted a response that did exactly what I wanted. It confirmed my mum. It confirmed my lack of authority. It confirmed that I had no operational role, and it attached documentation showing that any prior representation to the contrary had been inaccurate, clean, factual, unemotional. The buyer received it. So did my parents. The silence that followed was different, heavier, not strategic. Defeated. A few days later, my mother emailed again. Short this time. I never thought it would end like this. I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop. I didn't respond, because that sentence wasn't about reflection. It was about loss of control. At work, my life continued forward. The regional role expanded. New projects, new responsibilities, people who asked my opinion and actually waited for the answer. One afternoon, Elaine stopped by my office. You seem lighter, she said. I replied. She nodded. It shows. That night, Mark and I talked about buying a house. Not immediately, not impulsively, but realistically, without factoring in emergency calls or hidden obligations. This feels different, he said. It is, I replied. Nothing's pulling me backward anymore. The closing date for the sale was announced the following Monday. 3 weeks out. Susan called me that afternoon. There's one more thing, she said. What I asked. They tried to include a clause, she replied. A non-disparagement provision tied to you. I sat up straighter. I'm not part of the sale. Exactly, she said, which is why it's inappropriate. What did you do? I asked. I rejected it, she replied, and documented why. I smiled for the first time that day. What happens now? I asked. Now, she said, they close without you, without your name, without your silence. I leaned back and looked out the window, watching the city move the way it always had, indifferent to family drama and quiet power shifts. Chapter 9 wasn't about victory. It was about inevitability. They had built something on my reliability without ever acknowledging it. Once that foundation was gone, the structure had to change. They sold the business, not because I attacked them, but because I stopped holding it together. And in that absence, everything they took for granted finally had to stand on its own. Some things couldn't. The sale would go through. Their version of the story would live on in pieces softened by time and denial. Mine didn't need retelling. It was already done. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for the fallout. I was watching it pass me by. The closing week arrived quietly. No countdown, no dramatic calls, just a steady tightening of timelines and signatures that didn't include me. That absence was intentional, and it was the first time it felt like relief instead of rejection. Susan called on Monday morning. The buyer requested final confirmations, she said. Everything's clean. Your name isn't anywhere it shouldn't be. Good, I replied. There's one more thing, she added. Your father asked if you'd be willing to sign a goodwill letter. Not legally required. Symbolic. I didn't answer right away. A letter saying what I asked. That you support the transition, she said. That you wish them well. I smiled thinly. They want closure without accountability, I said. Yes, she replied. Do you want to provide it? No, I said. I want accuracy. Susan understood immediately. Then we say no. The word felt clean. Final. On Wednesday, my mother tried again. She didn't email this time. She mailed a card, thick paper, soft colors, handwritten. Emily, I keep thinking about how close we used to be. I don't know how things went so wrong. I wish you would remember that family matters more than money. I read it once, then placed it face down on the table. Family had mattered more than money. That was the problem. Money was measurable. Boundaries were enforceable. Family, in my case, had been used to erase both. I didn't respond. That evening, Lucas called. His voice sounded different, less sharp, less certain. They're finalizing, he said. Tomorrow. Yes, I replied. He hesitated. I wanted to say, I didn't realize how much you handled. I closed my eyes. I know, I said. I thought you just liked being involved, he continued. Dad always said you were happy helping. I let that land. Happiness isn't the same as consent, I said. He was quiet for a long moment. What happens now, he asked. That depends on you, I replied. Not me. He sighed. I don't know if I can do this. You'll learn, I said, the same way I did. We ended the call without resolution. That night, Mark and I walked the neighborhood, cold air stinging our faces, the streets calm and ordinary. It felt strange that something so large could be ending without spectacle. Do you feel vindicated, he asked. No, I said honestly, I feel finished. The closing happened the next morning. I didn't attend. I didn't watch. I didn't ask for updates. Susan texted when it was done. Closed. You're officially out. I sat at my desk at work and let the message sit for a moment before replying. Thank you, I wrote. A few hours later, my phone buzzing. My father. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. It's done, he said. His voice was flat. I hope you're satisfied. Satisfied. As if this had been about winning. As if I'd taken something from him. I deleted the message. The aftermath came in waves. My parents downsized quickly. The house sold. They moved into a smaller place farther from town. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard they were telling people the business ran its course. Lucas stayed on with the buyer for 3 months before leaving. Hannah posted optimistic updates online about new beginnings. None of it involved me. That was the point. At work, my responsibilities expanded again. Elaine asked me to lead a new integration project, one that required decisiveness and trust. I accepted without hesitation. At home, Mark and I began looking seriously at houses. Not dream houses. Real ones. Places that fit our lives as they were not as backups for someone else's emergencies. One afternoon, months later, I ran into my mother at a pharmacy. She looked smaller, tired. Emily, she said, startled. Hi, I replied. She studied my face like she was searching for something familiar. You seem, well, she said. I am, I replied. She nodded slowly. We never meant for you to feel pushed out. I didn't argue. I know, I said. You meant for me to stay useful. Her eyes flickered. I hope one day you'll understand why we did what we did, she said. I met her gaze. I already do. We stood there for a moment, the space between us quiet and final. When I walked away, I didn't feel heavy. I felt clear. That clarity followed me into the next season of my life. I stopped bracing for calls that didn't come. Stopped translating silence into obligation. Stopped measuring my worth by how much I could carry without complaint. Chapter 10 wasn't about closure. It was about consequence. Not punishment, not revenge. Just the natural result of withdrawing from a role that was never mine to play. When you stop providing stability without consent, people have to face what they built on top of you. Some rebuild. Some retreat. Some blame. None of that is yours to manage. The only thing that remains is the space you reclaim. And for the first time in my life, that space felt like my own. Spring came quietly. No announcements. No milestones marked on a calendar. Just the slow return of light in the mornings and the sound of birds outside our window again. For the first time in years, the change of season didn't bring anxiety with it. That was how I knew something fundamental had shifted. Life didn't feel like it was waiting for the next demand. At work, the integration project moved faster than expected. I was trusted to make decisions without oversight, to push back when something didn't make sense, to say no without cushioning it in apologies. Each time I did, the world didn't collapse. It adjusted. That realization still surprised me. One afternoon, Elaine stopped by my office and closed the door. I wanted to talk to you about something, she said. I looked up alert, but calm. We're restructuring the leadership team, she continued. There's going to be a vacancy at the director level later this year. I waited. I'd like you to be considered, she said. Considered. Not promised, not dangled. Offered, honestly. I thanked her and asked for time to think. When I told Mark that evening, he smiled in that quiet way he had when he was proud but didn't want to overwhelm me. You're building something that belongs to you, he said. I am, I replied, and it doesn't feel fragile. That was the word. Fragile. Everything I'd built before had required constant maintenance, constant vigilance, constant readiness to absorb stress that wasn't mine. This felt different, stronger, rooted. My family stayed quiet. Weeks passed without messages, without indirect reach-outs, without friends of friends testing the water. I didn't chase the silence. I let it exist. Then one afternoon in April, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. It was from my uncle, my father's older brother. We'd never been close. He'd always been polite but distant, the kind of relative who stayed on the edges of family dynamics. Emily, I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to reach out after hearing about the business sale. There are some things I think you should know. I stared at the screen longer than I meant to. Then I forwarded it to Susan. Her response was measured. If you're curious, read it. But remember, information doesn't require action. That reminder mattered. I replied to my uncle and suggested a phone call. He didn't waste time. They're telling a version of events, he said, after a few minutes of small talk. One that paints you as impulsive. I said nothing. They're saying you walked away out of resentment, he continued. That you couldn't accept being excluded. I almost smiled, and I asked, and it's not convincing, he said. Not to people who know how much you carried. That caught my attention. There were things your father never admitted, he added. About how dependent the operation became on you. About how often you covered mistakes. I listened steady. I'm telling you this because I don't think they expected consequences, he said. And they're struggling with that. I'm not surprised, I replied. He hesitated. They're hoping time will soften this? I nodded. Time reveals more than it softens. When the call ended, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt confirmed. That night, I told Mark about the conversation. They still don't understand, he said. They don't need to, I replied. Understanding was never the requirement. Accountability was. As spring moved toward summer, something else changed. I stopped explaining myself in my head. I stopped rehearsing conversations that weren't happening. Stopped preparing defenses for accusations no one had voiced directly. That mental space had been occupied for so long, I hadn't realized how loud it was until it went quiet. One Sunday afternoon, I found myself sorting through old boxes in the closet. Papers, photos, objects I'd carried through multiple moves without ever unpacking properly. At the bottom of one box, I found a notebook. It was mine. I recognized my handwriting immediately. Notes from my early 20s. Lists, schedules, reminders for the business. Margins filled with things like follow up with supplier cover shift, fix error before dad sees. I flipped through it slowly. Page after page of responsibility. None of it acknowledged. I closed the notebook and placed it back in the box, this time at the very back. That version of me didn't need to be carried forward anymore. In May, the offer came through. Director of Regional Operations. I accepted without hesitation. The day I signed the contract, I felt something settle inside me. Not excitement, stability. The kind that comes from alignment. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message I didn't expect. Lucas. I stared at his name for a long moment before opening it. I'm leaving the company. Starting something else. I just wanted you to hear it from me. I read it twice. Then I replied, "Good luck." He responded, a few minutes later, "I should have listened to you earlier." I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to punish him, because the conversation he wanted was years overdue. And I wasn't reopening old doors just to help someone else feel better. Chapter 11 wasn't about reconciliation. It was about separation without hostility, about letting people grow at their own pace, even when that pace was slower than yours. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting for apologies. I was building a life that didn't require permission or approval to continue. And that I was learning was the quietest form of freedom, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that simply stays. The moment I knew it was truly over came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. No phone call, no message, no sudden realization triggered by news or confrontation, just a quiet awareness as I stood in the kitchen, coffee cooling in my mug. Sunlight stretching across the floor in a way that felt permanent instead of temporary. Nothing was waiting to pull me back. That absence used to feel dangerous, like I'd missed something important, like neglect. Now it felt intentional, chosen. I thought about how many years of my life had been shaped by anticipation, anticipating my parents' needs, anticipating Lucas's mistakes, anticipating the moment someone would need me to smooth things over, fix a gap, take responsibility quietly, so everyone else could stay comfortable. Anticipation had been my prison, and I had mistaken it for love. In the months that followed the sale, my family settled into their new reality without me. I heard fragments through distance. My parents downsized again, complained about expenses they'd never had to consider before, talked about how things used to be easier. They never once acknowledged why. They didn't need to. Acknowledgement would have required looking directly at what they lost when they pushed me out. And people who benefit from denial rarely choose clarity. Lucas sent one more message in early summer. I'm trying to figure out who I am without the business. I read it carefully. Then I typed back a single line. That's not something I can help you with. He didn't respond. I wasn't angry when I sent it. I wasn't cold. I was honest. Some lessons don't land when someone explains them. They land when no one steps in. At work, my days filled with decisions that actually belonged to me. I signed off on budgets that reflected reality instead of wishful thinking. I led teams who didn't confuse my calm with compliance. When I said no, no one questioned my loyalty. That still surprised me. Authority, when it's earned, doesn't need justification. Mark and I bought a house that fall. Not the biggest, not the safest investment on paper, just the right one. A place with creaky floors and a backyard that needed work. Something imperfect that asked us to participate, not rescue it. The first night we slept there, surrounded by boxes, Mark asked me if I missed my family. I thought about it. I miss who I thought they were, I said, not who they proved themselves to be. He nodded. That was enough. On Thanksgiving, a year after the envelope appeared on my plate, we cooked for ourselves. No tension, no performance. No one telling me not to make things uncomfortable. I set the table and noticed something small but significant. There was no extra chair. For the first time, I wasn't holding space for someone who never planned to show up for me. That night, after the dishes were done and the house was quiet, I sat alone in the living room and allowed myself to look back without rewriting the story to make it kinder. I saw the pattern clearly now. How praise had been used to keep me useful. How silence had been used to punish resistance. How family had been invoked only when they needed compliance. What they called love had always required me to disappear just enough to keep the system running. And when I stopped disappearing, the system collapsed. That wasn't cruelty. That was truth. Revenge doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like paperwork filed correctly. Sometimes it looks like refusing to sign your name again. Sometimes it looks like choosing accuracy over harmony. I didn't scream, I didn't threaten, I didn't demand an apology that would never be honest anyway. I withdrew my labor. I withdrew my credibility. I withdrew my silence. And without those things, everything shifted. The power didn't flip because I took it. It flipped because I stopped propping it up. If there's one thing I know now, it's this. Being the reliable one does not make you indispensable. It makes you exploitable. Until you decide otherwise. If you've ever been excluded quietly, if you've ever been told you didn't need recognition because you were strong, if you've ever been treated like support instead of family, know this. You don't owe anyone your stability. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe anyone access to you just because they're related by blood. Boundaries aren't revenge. They're clarity. And clarity changes everything. If this story resonated with you, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what boundary you're learning to set. And if you want more stories like this about family drama, betrayal, karma, and the quiet moment the tables finally turn, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with me. Some endings are loud. This one was quiet, and it gave me my life back.